Hi there. Welcome back to the Out of the Cave podcast with Lisa Schlossberg. I'm your host, Lisa Schlossberg, a licensed social worker, certified health coach, personal trainer, and yoga instructor. If you, like I have, struggle with your relationship with food, eating, and body image, I am here with this podcast to guide you into healing the relationship you have with yourself through a trauma-informed, holistic, and mind-body-soul approach. Together, we can support you in building a lifestyle of more peace, freedom, safety, and power. Hello, and welcome back to the Out of the Cave podcast. This is me, Lisa Schlossberg, and I'm your host. Today, we are going to honestly just dive right in because we are continuing the conversation. I think of this episode as like chapter two to the book. As I mentioned in the previous episode, you got the introduction, the high-level overview of the things that I want to talk to you about and teach you. The last episode is what I titled in my own head as Chapter 1. And so now we're back for Chapter 2. That's what we have in store. So without any further ado, let's just do it. The first thing, before I get into it, the first thing that I realized on one of my walks this week when I was thinking about doing this episode is I'm noticing how, like, my own tendency to speed up and operate from a very habitual kind of sense of urgency. And I notice this shows up sometimes in my relationships, maybe it does for yours too, where it feels like if you really take your time, or I feel like, I will speak for myself, if I really take my time to think about my words and share, slowly, that people will be uninterested or bored or whatever. And so I think that's why the first couple episodes came out the way they did, where I was like breezing through, like I shared a lot, but I was like still breezing through so many things for the sake of getting through it. And then I realized as I've been reflecting about these episodes, like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that here. I think that a lot of this stuff is way too important. And especially if you're new to it, the more detail and nuance and information I can give you, the better. And so what I realized is you actually can speed me up. There are functions now, pretty much I think everywhere you listen to podcasts, you could listen to this at twice the speed if you want to. So I'm going to let you do that if you want to do that. But I am setting the intention to slow myself down and really just share with you what I think matters and is important. And if it takes me 700 episodes to get through all of this, you know what? I'm willing. I am willing to do it. So that is the intention. And all right, so we're starting there. I'm going to give you details. I'm going to go into everything because it's like I remember this quote, but I'm going to butcher it. But I remember seeing this in college once, and it was essentially like, if you don't have the time to do it right the first time, you'll have to take the time to do it all over again or something like that. And I think about that often. And so with this, it's like, I don't want to, record a whole episode about a topic and then like weeks later be like, oh, I really should have included whatever. So I'm making a commitment to myself that I'm going to give you the whole shebang. All right. So anyway, that being said, the other thing that I think is going to happen probably frequently with this series of podcast episodes is, as usually happens when I sit down and record. And, this happens with so many of my podcast guests where we have a conversation, we do an interview, the podcast comes out, and then like I get an email being like, oh, I really should have said this, or I wish I said that. Or so that keeps happening to me after I hit record or I stop recording. And so the way that I think this is going to happen is like the beginning of chapter 2 is really going to be like a follow-up on chapter 1. And then the beginning of chapter 3 is most likely going to be a follow-up to chapter 2. So I say that now because before diving into kind of the next part and getting into all of the fierce self-compassion content, there are a few reflections I had about tender self-compassion that I want to share with you first. But even before that, I had another thought about just like the spiritual journey and lifestyle. And I want to say something about that because I know in the last time that I was talking about it, I'm bringing up like these really big life events or milestones where, you might feel in your soul that you have to leave a job or a relationship or a city or something like that. And those are major. But especially as this conversation becomes one that where we eventually will bring it to things like intuitive eating. I keep saying, right, we want intuitive eating. We need our intuition online. We need to be connected to our intuitive nature. And so I think it's important to kind of bridge the gap between, it's not just these massive life things where your soul is speaking to you, but when I talk about living intuitively as the foundation for eating intuitively, it's not the big things. It's the everyday, like really mundane things that I'm realizing over and over the last few years, that it's not like, my life used to be that I would like live this life and then every once in a while there was like a spiritual experience. And especially with where I'm at now, with the morning routine you heard about and all the things, my sacred rituals, what I'm feeling is that life is a spiritual experience. Like if you're open to it, if you're connected to it, every day, every second of the day, there's no separation. There is no separation between the human life and a spiritual experience. A human life is a spiritual experience. It's just a lot of us don't know that or aren't connected to it or don't, have that relationship with it potentially yet. So a few things kind of came to me that I want to, again, just illustrate for you so you have an idea of what I'm really talking about on a more everyday / lifestyle kind of plane. And so an example that comes to me, or what has happened for me, is I will get now, okay, before I say this, let me say this. When I say that I get a hit, what I mean is that I get like that knowing, like I talked about last time, the knowing, the sensing, the feeling, whatever it is, there's a clarity of like, this is what I need to do, or this is the next step, or this is what's right, or something like that. There's direction, there's clarity, there's guidance, right? And it just, for me, becomes, I think the easiest way to say it, and sometimes the way I've heard other people say it, is like I get the hit to do something. Some people will call it like a download or whatever. I've said that too. But before I kind of go further into this, what I want to say is everyone experiences it differently. Okay. So this is something that can be really helpful to learn about. Now, I am no expert in what I'm about to share with you, but I do think that it kind of sets an important foundation for what's coming, especially if you're interested in applying this to your own life. And so what I want to first kind of start with is the clair senses. Okay. So when we start talking about psychic abilities, because that's really what this is, that's really what it is. Like, how do you just know things? We're talking about psychic abilities. So welcome to the conversation. We, I think, need to have some language around the clair senses. And what that is if you have heard of like clairvoyance or clairaudience, clairsentience, there's a few of them. I think there's like 8, maybe some people will talk about 5, 8, 10. But the point is that some people get a quote unquote hit. I'm going to say get a hit from the universe, and they get it or they receive it in the form of like hearing things. That would be clairaudience. Some people see things like visuals. Some people feel things in their bodies, like energy, and some people just know things. And part of the reason, and I started getting more connected to and familiar with this when I started working one-on-one with Cynthia, who again has been on this podcast, teaches at Omega with me. and the work around this has been absolutely fascinating. But what I think is very validating is that for me, the way that things show up, the way that I just kind of know things is I don't see things and I don't hear things. It just drops into my body. I don't feel it in my body necessarily. I just know it. Like I cannot describe. So I'm saying that again because if you want to start paying attention to yourself, like how do you experience your own psychic abilities? You might notice that you see things or hear things, but what I thought was funny about it was when I talked to Cynthia about this at first, I was explaining to her kind of how it works for me, where I just know it. I can't, there's nothing else I could say. I cannot describe it. I just know it. And there's this kind of certainty to it. There's a clarity to it. There's a matter of fact energy to it. And it was funny because I remember her response being like, that is the easiest to invalidate. Like it's, if you see something, you see it. If you hear it, you hear it. But when there's no, not only is there like no quote unquote proof or evidence for any of these, but especially how it shows up in my own system, it is the easiest to invalidate. And so it's like, yeah, so that tracks. And so, okay, so anyway, I want to offer you that because I think it's important to explore. Because now, if we are going to have, again, this conversation about intuitive eating, it's like, well, how do you receive your guidance? Where does your clarity come from? And just start, playing with that. Now that I've said that, what I wanted to share with you is I've had this experience where this happened the other day. I came home from a walk or the gym or something, and in my mind, I was like, okay, I know how the rest of the day is going to go. I have this to do and this to do and this to do. And I got this hit that what I needed to do was sit down and meditate. And now that I actually enjoy meditation, there wasn't that much resistance to it, but it was still like, I have other stuff to, this wasn't part of the plan. I have other stuff I need to do. And this is how it works. This is how like a spiritual lifestyle for me works, where it feels like I'm not told what to do, but guided to what to do. I'm told what to do. And I have a choice. I can either listen and honor that, or I can not. And so what happens very often for me is that I will get this guidance of, sit down to meditate or whatever else it is. It's not always to meditate, but it was in this instance. And my reaction to it, again, is like, I don't like want to do that right now. Or like, I don't feel like that wasn't part of my plan. Like I have a day to do and I have a human life to live. And like, I don't want to. And so I just kind of like let myself temper tantrum about it. And then I sit down and meditate. And what happens so frequently is that in this meditation, there's like a massive light bulb, epiphany, connection, message, download, whatever it is. And it's like, and then after following the call, I have this moment of like, oh yeah, that's why I needed to do that. Okay. Like I showed up. Point though, to me, this is what it always reminds me of is, again, when you are guided to a direction to do a thing, instead of questioning it, what I've learned is just follow it. Just follow it. You don't need to know where it goes. You don't need to know how it ends. You don't need to know why. And this has everything to do with your own internal experience with yourself. But okay, we'll get there. But here, that's kind of the point. And that's how it works. So there are these very everyday life kind of examples of this. And the other one that I think of, but there are so many, is one time when I was living in San Diego, I was like all excited. I had a great day, great night, and I was going to take myself out to dinner to this restaurant that I love and like have a glass of wine and get the octopus. And I had this whole like, this is how I want to celebrate. I don't know what I was celebrating, but I was excited to go out. And I remember like I got all dressed up and I put on my booties and I put on my cute jacket and I put on my cute hat and I was walking out the door, literally walking out the door of my apartment, all ready to go. And I walked all the way down to the hallway to the elevator of my building. And as soon as I like hit the button to get on the elevator, I feel this knowing, this hit that was just no. It's a no. You're not, it was like my body saying like, I don't want to do this. And I remember feeling in that I stopped in my tracks. I watched the elevator door open and then close. And I stood there in this conflict between the part of me that wanted to go out and enjoy myself, enjoy this meal, and the knowing that that's not what I was meant to do, or it just wasn't, in the divine alignment or the divine timeline. I don't know, it wasn't it. And I remember standing there and this is what I think really is just so important. I remember standing there being like, okay, I clearly have a choice. I'm either going to listen and honor it, or I'm not. But there is no confusion. There is no confusion about it. I know exactly what the guidance is. It's not mixed messages. I saw this recently show up and I really liked it. It was like, you're not getting mixed messages. You just don't like the message you're getting. Right. And that is so often how it works. You're not confused. It's not that you don't know. You definitely know. You just don't want to know, right? Like I was saying last time, it's like there are reasons we don't want to be connected to our bodies and in touch with our intuition, because then we have to know. And sometimes, especially if you like having total control over everything, it can be very inconvenient to live this life of co-creation with the universe rather than creation on your own terms. And so I remember being like, I have a choice. And in that moment, I cannot describe to you, it was so, that was the energy my body was like, oh, come on. Like I got ready. I put makeup on. I have this cute outfit. Why? Why is this not the right thing to do? Why is this not in alignment? Why? Oh, this is so annoying and frustrating. Like that's what it's like sometimes. And so I remember, and again, the reason I'm telling you this, oh my God, I think this is so fucking cool, is because it's kind of like, all right. So there's you, right? There's you, the conscious human adult being. And then within you, there is your inner child and all your like inner parts. And the way that I think about it, the gestures I'm seeing myself doing with my own hands right now is, and then there's like your higher self, God, the universe, right? That dimension. Okay. So what I think is so fucking cool about it is that the way it's almost like think of God, the universe, the higher power as like your parent. And then the way that you're in relationship with that parenting dynamic is also reflected in your dynamic as the parent to your own inner child. Okay. So if you go back to like, if you ever look at the Out of the Cave logo that I have tattooed on my body, and some of you do too, those 3 levels of the little, dude, if you check it out, you'll see what I'm saying. But that's what that's actually about. Okay. That's what that's about, is the dimensions of our human experience, the spiritual being, the physical experience. Okay. So this is why when we talk about reparenting, which we're going to do more in this episode and beyond, I think it's so cool that I get this direction from what I could consider my quote unquote parent, like, don't go out for dinner tonight. And then me, the conscious human adult, have the temper tantrum that's like, but I want to go out, but I have this plan, and this is how I feel, and this is what I want. And then if I allow myself to have that temper tantrum which is to say that I am practicing tender self-compassion, that I am willing to be with myself in my own discomfort, with myself in my own suffering, with myself in my own resistance, which is to say that I am angry and I am sad and I am grieving. I'm grieving the night that I was going to have, right? And it's like, if I can be with myself in that, now I also can tolerate that from my inner child when I'm giving her direction that she doesn't like very much. Okay? You see? Do you see how all of this connects? This is the hardest thing about a podcast. It's like, I don't know. I don't know what's happening in your head right now, but that feels really important in terms of the framework of how this is all going. Because again, before we get to fierce self-compassion, which is taking action, you want to talk about how to take action to alleviate your suffering. This is how it happens, because sometimes you're going to have to take action and you're going to be uncomfortable about it. So it's very much the same, again, dynamic of sometimes you're going to be kind of told and guided what to do, and it's not going to be what you want it to be. But that is the craziness of the human condition, where you are spiritual, but you're also all the other things. So that example is what I want you to kind of like think about and consider, because now, again, let's talk about intuitive eating. Some of the time, not all the time, okay, I'm still a human being on planet Earth, so this is not the way that my relationship with food looks all of the time, but I do have these experiences where I just know, and sometimes I do see, actually, I get visuals of what to eat, of what I'm going to eat. And it didn't start necessarily with food, but a few years ago, I started noticing I would just have visions. I would literally see, like, this is what's going to happen later. This is where we're going. One time, this actually came to me in a dream, but I couldn't find my passport. And I literally like asked the universe to just kind of guide me to where it is. And then I had a dream, and then that's where it was. So like these things kind of started happening over and over again. And the reason I'm saying this is because then it started being food also. It started being, this is how I know what to go home and eat. This is how I know what I want to buy. This is how I know it. There's just this intuitive guidance around food. And that is how I understand and experience intuitive eating. It is so much deeper and far beyond listen to your body in terms of hunger and fullness, which I keep saying, and I will keep continuing to say. We are really listening to the soul speaking through the body. And I just think of this one specific example, like I have in my notes, the banana. I don't know, it's just like a random example of one day where I was kind of like, I knew on some level, but I wasn't really consciously thinking about it, that I like needed something to hold me over. I needed a snack. I needed something before or after the gym. I don't know what it was. And it was like a clear just message, like banana. And I was like, okay, that's it. And it's really helped a lot when it comes to like, I don't know what I'm in the mood for, or I don't know what, like it just, sometimes I feel, again, like I'm being parented by the universe. It's like, this is what you're going to eat. And I'm like, all right, cool. Thank you. So I think that's crazy, but I think that I want to, again, provide clear expectations of what it could look like. And for me, what it does look like. All right. 25 minutes into the episode. Now I want to tell you my follow-up thoughts about tender self-compassion. One of the things that I think is important to clarify is, especially in the moments where, all right, so let's go back. Tender self-compassion. You're being mindful that you are experiencing a moment of pain, suffering, discomfort. You are remembering your shared humanity, that you are not alone. This is part of the human experience. There's nothing wrong with you. And then the third part is kindness. How can you be kind to yourself, right? So those are the steps of the self-compassion practice. But one of the things that I notice gets in the way of actually doing that kind of practice with and for yourself is when you are in pain or suffering or discomfort that you yourself created. So what often happens is once you kind of get the hang of it, this whole tender self-compassion thing, it becomes relatively accessible to say, this thing happened. It makes sense that you're upset about it. Someone did this thing or this, things that were like totally out of your control. It's not your fault. That's like the lower hanging fruit. But where this matters the most is when you are in pain and suffering that you created for yourself. Think about it. I like to use, in my own understanding of this, I like to use the example of waking up hungover. Because the only reason that you're hungover is because you drank last night. This is no one else's fault. It wasn't out of your control. This isn't like life being lifey. This isn't like grieving a shitty circumstance. This is like you did this. Your choices, your decisions, your behaviors, right? Now, when you wake up hungover and maybe you're like really sick and like throwing up or whatever it is, I'm sorry to use this gross example, but it's just the way that it works for me. You have choices. You have options. How are you going to show up in that situation? And what a lot of us do, and myself included, is when I wake up really hungover, I can choose to beat myself up and go with the story of, well, you only feel sick because you did this to yourself. This is your fault. You're the problem. You're bad. You, right? That energy, that relationship is you don't deserve compassion. I know that you're sick, but you don't deserve compassion. You're not worthy of love because you did this to yourself. And that is a really huge problem on a lot of levels. And so that's why I want to bring it to your attention, because the other option that we have is to wake up and feel just as sick, right? So doing it that way, the first way, that's the second wound. So now you're nauseous, now you're throwing up, now you're hungover, you feel bad physically. Now you're the second wound. That is, you're not being kind to yourself. You're judging and critiquing and shaming and whatever else you're doing to yourself, and it doesn't feel good. You're the second wound. Now, the other option you have, right, is to say you're really hungover, you really don't feel well, and you are worthy of love, and you do deserve compassion. Yeah, you did this to yourself. Fine. Yeah, it was your own choices. Fine. Okay, fine. But in this moment, right now, you're in pain. You're suffering. So can you be kind to yourself in that? The way that you would anyone else? Right? And that is the thing that I think matters the most, because it's very much like that example that Kristen Neff talks about with the dog. You're not being kind and compassionate to the dog so that it heals faster. You're not doing it. You're not providing or offering or being a source of kindness, love, and compassion because you want to take the pain away. You're being a source of loving compassion because the dog is in pain. And that, again, that's the whole foundation for applying this to yourself. You're not being kind to yourself to get rid of your pain. You're being kind to yourself because you're in pain. And anyone who has ever suffered from a hangover knows it feels a lot better when you're just like, okay, when you just accept yourself in it, it takes away the second wound. It's not going to make you feel any less nauseous, but it will alleviate some of your suffering because you're accepting yourself. And that is the point of tender self-compassion. So it's important, again, now, right? That's the example using alcohol, but think about how this relates to food. And this is why, if I'm so passionate about this, because let's say you binge, you overeat, whatever it is, or you're really working on fueling yourself enough and you can't get out of the habit of undereating or chronically dieting or over exercising. It's all the same, right? If you find yourself engaging in a behavior that causes you harm, and this, oh God, this is going to be so good when we actually talk about fear, self-compassion, but this has to happen first. So when you are engaging in a behavior, or you have just engaged in a behavior that causes your own pain, that you caused your own suffering, that is the moment you need you the most. And that is the moment, likely, that you abandon yourself the most. Think about this. Think about what happens after you, let's use the example because this is relatable to a lot of people, of binging or overeating or emotional eating or stress eating, whatever it is, turning to food. Think about what happens in the aftermath of that. You maybe, again, are like nauseous, you have a stomach ache, you're in pain, you're in discomfort. And very often it's like, I hate myself for doing this. I am the problem. I am broken. I am defective. It's me. I don't have willpower. I'll never get it together. Blah, 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 blah. I'm a failure. All of that. That's the second wound. That is not only not ever going to help you change your behavior that you want to change, but it also is creating more fear and conflict in your internal system. So now you're moving further away from the safety that you need in your body, which is also creating more reasons for you to go back and find safety in the things that you don't want to be using. So what happens in the aftermath of something like a binge, if we look at it through the lens of reparenting, parent-child dynamic, and tender self-compassion, is now you're in pain and you're suffering because you just overate. And then what happens? You don't stay there. You're not practicing self-compassion. You're not willing often to sit in your own pain and discomfort because you're the one that caused it. And so what ends up happening is you cause your own pain and suffering. And then instead of being present with yourself in it, you leave. You abandon you. You are now the one in pain. You are the one in discomfort. And because you feel unworthy of receiving your own love and acceptance because you're the one that created it, now the part of you that is in pain, the part of you that is suffering, the part of you that is uncomfortable is all alone. The part of you that is hurting has been left alone. And this, again, I hope you can feel how important this is for all of this. So the invitation here is to stay present with yourself, practice tender self-compassion, which is to say, this hurts. I just use all this food to stuff down my feelings, and now my body is uncomfortable and in pain. I'm uncomfortable emotionally. It's okay to say, I feel guilty that I just did that. I felt completely out of control. Now I feel scared. I feel shame. Right? To stay with it, to label it. This is the beginning. This is the mindfulness part of the self-compassion practice. And this is where you need you the most. I feel so emotional even talking about it because that's the thing. That's where, going back to what we talked about already, this is where like diet culture conditioning has created such a fragmented sense of self within us. Because if we've internalized the belief that if we caused our own suffering, we don't deserve love, that is keeping us ruptured. That's keeping us in a lifestyle of disconnection. So this is where we need it the most. You hurt yourself. You caused your own pain. Fine. Tell the truth about it and just stay present with it. That is, wow, this hurts. This is uncomfortable. I really don't like that I just did that. It's okay. It's okay. Right? That and then you get to move through. This hurts. I'm not alone. This is normal. Right? And this is where I always want to say to you, you're human. You are human. You're a spiritual being having a physical experience with an animal brain in a social context, surviving on food. It's okay. It's okay. that you did this to yourself. It's okay. You're doing your best. You're just trying to manage as well as you can. And sometimes that means leaning on food. And sometimes it means leaning on food so much, so compulsively, and so out of control that it actually hurts you. That's okay. But make no mistake that because you are the one that did it, it doesn't mean anything about how worthy of love and kindness you are. So again, if we want to live a life where we feel lovable and worthy of receiving compassion, no matter what, that starts with you. That starts with you. And not, again, just the low-hanging fruit of like life hurting sometimes, but even and especially when you are the one hurting yourself. It's going to happen. It's inevitable. We're all doing it all the time. We're just not talking about it. So that's why I'm talking about it. And this is also why, I hope this is all like making more sense as we go. This is why the other day when I was journaling, I posted this on Instagram because it just came out of me that it was like, if you're not looking at all of this as an opportunity to embody love, you will never access the peace that you're looking for, period. Like if you are clinging to the paradigm that says, because you caused your own suffering, you don't deserve kindness. If you're clinging to that and you refuse to be kind to yourself, if you are refusing to be compassionate and loving towards yourself, you will never get the peace you're looking for, period. All of this is really a return to love. This is where you're struggling the most, where you're hurting the most, where you abandon yourself the most. If you look at all of these ruptures and all of the quote unquote dysfunction and all of the disorder, if you look at it all as an opportunity of how can I embody love, that's the path. This is a spiritual journey. This is a spiritual path. It's love. That's the cure. Like, okay. Anyway, so that is why I talk about, as has come up here many times, we're using the relationship you have with food as the mechanism through which you learn how to reparent yourself. We're using the relationship you have with food as the mechanism through which you learn how to love yourself, how to accept yourself, how to be compassionate to yourself. That's the thing. So all these things that happen with food, if you view it not as a problem to solve, but an opportunity to embody love, you'll actually go where you want to go. And as I was thinking about all of this, I was reflecting on how if you listen to this podcast and you've heard client interviews and things like that, like one after the other, there is, they're all different, obviously, but there is a theme that when we get to the end of the episode and I ask people, any final words or any last nuggets of wisdom that you want to share, anything the people really need to know, how often that answer is some version of self-compassion. And you know that if you've heard them, it's like, this is the secret sauce because this is the foundation for all of it. But what I think is also kind of funny about it is the very common thread between a lot of the client interviews that I've done is it feels like this work is impossible to describe and articulate. Like over and over again, it's one person after another being like, I don't even know how to, I don't know what happens. I don't know how to talk about it. I don't know how to put language to it. Well, first of all, this is why. It's a spiritual journey. It's all really energetic. So again, we're limited by language. But this is why. Because when I'm working with people directly and I'm holding space of a group coaching program or one-on-ones, it's this kind of deep self-love, self-compassion work that completely transforms the relationship you have with yourself, completely changes the way that you relate to the universe, And then you come out the other side and it's like, yeah, I feel I feel completely different, but I have no idea how to tell people why or how. And it's like, this is the stuff. Okay, so anyway. All right, so we're 41 and a half minutes into the episode, and all I did was reflect on the last one. But this is what it will likely, like I said, look like if I just let myself tell you everything that I want to tell you. Before I get into fear self-compassion, which I promise you I will actually do today, I do want to also note that I have workshops for sale on my website. And one of them is specifically about tender self-compassion. One of them is specifically about fear self-compassion. And so if you're interested in more of this and you want kind of the workshop version of it, that's available on the website and you can check that out. Okay, we have arrived to fierce self-compassion. Now, I think this is my favorite thing ever in the whole world to teach and talk about and practice and embody, and I'm just so excited. So, again, this work is coming from Dr. Kristen Neff. She has free resources on her website. She has books written about this. If you want to go straight to the source, I will point you there. But here's the deal with fierce self-compassion. So, I think personally that it is always important to talk about or introduce fierce self-compassion as kind of a continuation and in some ways a comparison to tender self-compassion, which is why we did that first. So as a reminder, tender self-compassion is accepting ourselves to alleviate suffering. Fierce self-compassion is taking action to alleviate suffering. And this is where Kristen Neff will talk about how it is not compassionate to let behaviors slide if they cause harm and pain. Now, I know probably that there is at least someone out there that's like, but I thought you just said be kind to yourself if your behaviors cause you harm and pain. Now, that is a very valid question. And here's the thing about it. What we are paying attention to here, important clarifications when it comes to self-compassion, is about saying that you, as a human being, are worthy of love, connection, belonging, and kindness. You are worthy of all of those things, and you can be accepted unconditionally, right? No matter what, under any condition, unconditionally, you are loved and accepted. And we don't want to unconditionally accept our behaviors. So we need to talk about there is a difference between who you are and the way you behave. Who you are as a human being, the spirit, the soul, right? Who you are as a human is not what you think, feel, do. It's not your behaviors. It's not your title. It's not your job. It's not any of the stuff here in this human dimension. That's your human stuff. But you are way beyond that. Okay. So we need to make that distinction. And this is where also Brené Brown talks about the distinction between shame and guilt. Shame, I am bad. Guilt, I did something bad, right? So if you're feeling shame, it's really about who you are, your identity. Whereas if you feel guilt, it's more about your behaviors, things that you've done, things you regret, a mistake you made, things like that. And so there needs to be a separation between the way that you behave and who you are. Because as we talk more about fear, self-compassion, and again, as we integrate this into something like behavior change and sustainable behavior change, there needs to be both of those things playing out where you are clear that you are worthy of love and acceptance. And you don't want to unconditionally accept all of your behaviors because some of those behaviors are not working for you. So before I say more about that and make it more complicated, the beginning of fierce self-compassion in, again, relation to tender self-compassion is now we're taking action. And she has a great infographic about this that I share in my coaching program, in the workshops and the retreats, where tender self-compassion, this is a podcast, so I'm going to describe the visual to you, is a mama bear, like a bear holding her cub in a hug. That's the energy of tender self-compassion, right? You're the nurturing mother, the parent, the hug, right? Now, fierce self-compassion is the cub now is standing behind mama bear and mama bear is roaring. That is fierce self-compassion. So fierce self-compassion is defined by Kristen Neff, can show up in a few ways. Number one, it's protecting. So drawing boundaries and saying no. Providing and saying yes to our needs. Actually, I do need that. And motivating to learn, grow, and change the world. Okay. So that's what fierce self-compassion is you want to think about now you're still in the role of parent. You're in the role of mother. But you want to think about the energy of not your child is crying and scared and needs a hug from you, but that you have a child that someone else is trying to mess with. Right? And I know a lot of you are mothers listening to this podcast. Like when someone comes at your child, what happens in you? Right? And it's like, absolutely not. It is primal. It is so embedded in us that when something threatens the safety or well-being of our offspring, we are fierce. We jump into that energy. We don't even like think about it, right? This is like the stories of like lifting a car off a baby and things like that. It's like there is a fierceness that shows up that is, again, it's primal. We are designed that way. We have this within us. And so what is important about this is that tender self-compassion, which is really about the inner healing in our own, internal family systems, and fierce self-compassion, which is really about outer change, making those behavior changes, taking action, again, the balance of both is what creates a caring force that allows us to thrive. This is all, I think, the most important conversation we could have, because this is how we ultimately come back into balance and wholeness. Because the point also is we all have both of these energies within us. And another thing she includes on this infographic that I do think is very important is our authentic self claims both tender and fierce sides, which counters the gender role socialization we have all been steeped in. So for a lot of us, if we grew up in this culture, it can be socially acceptable / normal for women to be in the tender energy of that kind of like hug, that warm, nurturing energy. We associate that with women. And then we also associate fierceness and that kind of boldness with men. And we've been socialized that way. So, of course, there are exceptions to the rule. These are blanket statements. But there is a truth and a reality to the social context that we live in and the socialization that we've all experienced. And so it can be much more challenging for women to step into that fierce energy, because what happens? Because then we're told that we're bossy and we're too opinionated and we're this and we're that, and sometimes we're called a bitch and other things if we are tapping into fierceness. But also the same can be said for men who show and express themselves as tender and soft, and they get called different names, right? And so it's like we have to look at that component of it, because if you, again, I know a lot of the people that are listening to this, women who struggle with fierceness, which is why we struggle with behavior change and we struggle with taking action, we struggle all of that. We have to look at, well, there is a lot of messaging that suggests that we shouldn't, that we can't, that it's not safe to. If we do, we'll be judged. All of that kind of stuff plays into this, not just in the social context, but internally. And then it creates, again, internally, an environment where we don't really feel safe to be that fierce mama bear, not just internally and with ourselves and our own parts, but even with other people. So we have this pandemic of people, especially women, who are chronic people pleasers and over functioning. That's the codependent. That's how we're showing up, is because we don't feel safe to set boundaries. We don't feel safe to say no. We don't feel safe to say yes. We don't feel safe to be fierce and bold, right? And firm. And that is problematic if what we want is aligned action and change. Okay. So this is why, again, I hope it's all starting to come together and making sense why we have to really start here. So when it comes to fierce self-compassion, I keep saying we're starting here. First this, first that. Like, okay, we're not in the middle of a conversation. I think it's cool to know, if you need kind of a reminder about this as you're practicing in your own life, that fierce self-compassion, Chris and Neff started talking about this and studying this and writing about it. It was inspired by the Me Too movement a few years ago. And right, that was like one woman after another coming out and saying, this thing happened to me. And you can feel the energy of it. It's like, I'm using my voice. I'm speaking up. I'm being an advocate. I'm going to challenge the narrative. I'm going to share my story. I'm not going to just stay silent. I'm not going to just keep this inside anymore. I'm going to, and then, right, and it was one woman after another, me too, me too, me too. And so that was the inspiration behind this. And so it's coming from when we are being harmed, when we are being hurt, when we are being abused or neglected, when we are receiving treatment that is harmful to us, it's not compassionate to let that go. And so when it comes to our relationships with other people, this is why it's about setting boundaries, right? If someone is disrespectful, if someone is taking advantage, it's not compassionate to just nod your head and put a smile on. That's not self-care. That's not self-compassion. That's self-neglect. And so the compassionate thing to do is, if you are being hurt by something or someone, the compassionate thing to do is to set a boundary and say no. Okay? So this is much more clear, I think, when it comes to other people. I mean, we could have entire podcast episodes, and you know what? I'm sure at some point we will, about what this looks like when it comes to your relationships with other people, and then intricacies and the nuances and the resistance and all the fears of setting boundaries and all that stuff. But for this conversation, that's not where we're going. Where we're going with this is what it means for the relationship you have with yourself. Because now, let's go back. You have behaviors that are harmful to you. You sometimes do things that hurt you. Okay? That's fine. That's fine. First, we're accepting it. Transformation begins with a radical acceptance of what is. That is why tender self-compassion has to come first. To me, it is the necessary, absolutely necessary prerequisite. You can't get into fierceness until you're okay with tenderness. So it's okay that you have these behaviors that hurt you. And it is compassionate. It is compassion to do everything you can to make a change. If you're the one hurting yourself, it's not compassionate to let that slide. It's not compassionate to look away. So we do our best not to let other people harm us. And now we're also paying attention to, we want to do our best to not harm ourselves. And so what it really is about not turning away from mistreatment. And if we go back to what I was saying last time about tender self-compassion, even though the first step of tender self-compassion is mindfulness, and at first you might look at that and be like, again, kind of, what is this going to do? Just being aware that this sucks. How is that going to help me? If you're anything like me and your skeptic sounds like mine. But it's actually tremendously transformative what that does internally, because what it's doing is saying, I'm not denying this anymore. I'm not avoiding this anymore. And so if your whole life, what you've done is push it away and say, I don't like uncomfortable feelings, I'm not feeling it. For you to actually pause and say, wait, I'm having a feeling that's uncomfortable, that's huge. That's a complete turnaround of what you've been doing. And so the same is true here with fierce self-compassion, where it's not turning away. And I'm going to tell you how to do it. I'm going to walk you through the steps of fierce self-compassion. But that's where it begins, is by saying, this harms me. This hurts me. And what I've been doing, most likely, because, again, it's like when we engage in a behavior that hurts us or harms us, we feel as though we're not worthy of being loving or compassionate or empathetic or understanding of ourselves. And so we turn away. We turn away. And we don't sit with the fact that this actually hurts, that this is harmful, that in some ways this is abusive, because it feels like we are shaming ourselves. There's so much I'm going to say about that, right? But this is the point, is that when we start to pay attention and tell the truth about our behaviors and how they affect us, if those are negative, if there are negative consequences to our own behaviors, we turn away because it's too painful, it's hurtful, we don't want to take responsibility because we feel at fault, and it turns into an entire conversation of, now I'm the problem, and now you're in a shame spiral, and you can't get anywhere. And so we turn away. That's the point. We're turning away from our behaviors and the impact that they have. And in the turning away from mistreatment, now, again, we're not practicing self-compassion. And so we can't do anything about our behaviors. We can't change our behaviors because we're unwilling to sit with the truth of it. And so what fierce self-compassion is an invitation to say, we're not turning away anymore. And that can be, I want to validate this, that can be really challenging. And that can be very uncomfortable to say, my own behavior causes my own suffering, and I'm going to look at that. But the intention with fierce self-compassion that I want you to remember is that it is seeking to prevent harm. Okay? It's not about making you bad. It's not about shame and blame. It's not about judgment. It's about you're being harmed. And if you were going to put on that fierce mama bear energy as though it were your child that were being harmed, what would that look like? You would show up in a way that says, no more. I am not willing to accept this anymore. And what I'm saying to you is the first step is just being willing to look at it. And don't underestimate how transformative opening your eyes to what's right in front of you is when you have had your eyes closed for a very long time. Other things that can be helpful with this is the focus with fierce self-compassion and harm that's being done is the focus is on the situation, not the person. Okay? And this is true when it comes to other people and yourself. The focus is, this is harmful. This behavior, this situation, this condition, whatever it is, this is harmful. It's not, this person is bad. Okay? So when you notice that your tendency might be, because it's super normal and human, to say, this person is bad, you want to remind yourself just to come out of that kind of consciousness and remember, it's not about them, it's about you, first of all. But it's more looking at the situation and how it's impacting you that you want to focus on, okay? So the same is true, again, with yourself, where it's not you are bad for behaving this way. It's this situation that you're in is harmful. That's what you want to do something about. So you don't need to change the person. You need to change the situation. It just so happens that it's, you. And the other thing that I think is very important is the distinction between constructive versus destructive anger. Because when it comes to fierceness, it can be driven and motivated by anger, right? If someone crosses a boundary, very often, we talk about emotions are messengers. Emotions are just here to teach you stuff and bring you messages. Very often with anger, it really indicates that a boundary has been crossed for you. And this is why I don't like when people say anger is a secondary emotion. Like, it can be, right? Sometimes anger is like protecting us from the more vulnerable stuff like sadness or vulnerability, grief, things like that. I've totally experienced that. And then, I have to kind of get through the layer of anger to get to what's underneath it. Sure, that happens sometimes. But also, anger is not always a secondary emotion. Sometimes you feel angry because someone has violated you. And that is valid. And I don't think that, always thinking anger is a secondary emotion is almost like pathologizing what is absolutely normal and important. And again, so the point here is like anger can be adaptive. Anger can be wise. There are reasons that we feel angry sometimes. And so constructive anger is not reactive. It's not explosive. It's not compulsive. It sees clearly. There's a grounded energy from it or to it. And it's not, it's not the energy of, again, the word to me is just like explosion or violence, right? Like violence. And this is, there's so much to say about everything. When I've experienced a lot of fear and resistance to feeling anger or allowing anger because it feels so uncontrollable and it feels so violent, or the way that we've experienced anger in the past is that it was associated with violence. And that is so valid. And so constructive anger is not that. And it's important because that's destructive anger. That's not safe. Like, that's the anger that gets out of control. That's the anger that you run away from. And so it's really valid to know that not all anger is that way. And sometimes if it's coming from a place of love and protection, again, think about, you have a child. You have a child and someone is coming over and violating your child. You're angry. You're pissed off. Of course you are. But like, fuck yeah, you are. You should be. You have every reason to be. And it's coming from a desire to help and protect. And we need that. Again, it's primal. It's primal. It's within us. So it's important to keep that in mind, because if you want to protect yourself, you want to set boundaries, you want to honor your own needs, you want to move through the world in a way where you feel safe, part of it is you have to know that you can tap into fierceness. And when someone tries to fuck with you, you won't have it. You need to know, and you need to give yourself opportunities to witness your willingness to be fierce so that you can feel safe. And this is like back what I was saying in the last episode, and we'll continue to talk more about, but this is fierce self-compassion. Okay? Now, I'm going to say so many more things. Okay. I feel like I need to say more about the distinction between guilt and shame and who you are versus what you do before all this stuff can like really land the way I want it to. So let's talk about this quote. Couple things. This is coming from the Fierce Self-Compassion Workshop. The degree to which a person can grow is directly proportional to the amount of truth they can accept themselves without running away. I'm going to say that again. The degree to which a person can grow is directly proportional to the amount of truth they can accept about themselves without running away. So this is speaking to the first part, the mindfulness of tender and fierce, which we'll get to, the steps of practicing self-compassion. It's the not running away. Okay? So the degree to which you can grow is directly proportionate to the amount of truth you can accept about yourself without running away. If you can accept your feelings and accept yourself, tenderness, okay, right? You're not running away because you're being mindful of it. The same is true with fierce self-compassion. Can you tell the truth about the way that your behaviors are causing you harm, are hurting you, and just not run away? Can you just tell the truth about it? Okay? So that's where we're starting. The other quote that I love very much, Healing also means taking responsibility for the role you play in your own suffering. Okay, so you have behaviors, as do I, as do we all, that cause our own suffering. Okay, sure. Healing means taking responsibility for the role you play in your own suffering. Now, here's where this gets complicated and challenging, especially if we're not awake to it or aware of what's going on inside. Especially when it comes to food and eating, way more than other things in my experience. When it comes to food and eating, when we try to take responsibility, when we say this behavior harms me, this behavior hurts me, my overeating is causing me harm, all of a sudden it becomes immediately interpreted in our system as shame. Now it feels like you are shaming yourself. I shouldn't have done that. I'm a bad person. I did a bad thing. It becomes it becomes a shame spiral. And there's something really important, again, about we're not shaming. We are taking responsibility. So there's a difference between saying it's your fault and it's your responsibility. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault. You are a human being doing your best. Some of the time, using food is how you do that. That's okay. That's not your fault. And taking responsibility for healing your relationship with food, well, that's on you, right? So if you don't like your behaviors and you're causing your own pain, suffering, and harm and discomfort with your own behaviors, healing means taking responsibility for that. Not being at fault for that, taking responsibility for that. But now, here's a very important concept that, honestly, if you have follow-up questions about this, you want me to elaborate, please do let me know, because when I share this, sometimes people are like, what? It makes so much sense to me, but I don't know how it's going to land for you. So let me know. Here's an important thing. Brene Brown quote, being held accountable for racism, we're using the example of racism, but I'll unpack it. Being held accountable for racism and feeling shame is not the same thing as being shamed. Again, being held accountable and feeling shame is not the same thing as being shamed. Okay, here's why this matters. If you attempt to hold yourself accountable to your own behaviors that cause your own harm, and you feel shame, that is not the same thing as being shamed. If you hold yourself accountable and you say, I engaged in this behavior and it caused me suffering, and then you feel shame, you feel ashamed of that, you feel ashamed of yourself, you feel ashamed of your behavior, that's not the same thing as somebody shaming you. Okay? And this is what happens over and over and over again in our relationship with food when we try to work on it or pay attention to it or heal it. This is what happens is when I invite people to just, again, tell the truth about it and not run away, all of a sudden it becomes, well, now I'm shaming myself. And it's like, no, you're not. You're telling the truth and you're holding yourself accountable to a behavior that's causing you harm. So if we use the example, again, it's easier when it comes to other people. If someone says, we'll use the example because this is what happened with Brene Brown, that someone basically called her out and said, you should know that how what you said landed with me. And she was accused of saying something somewhat racist, I believe. And what she's saying is, if someone comes along and says, hey, I want to let you know that didn't work for me, or that made me feel uncomfortable, or I didn't appreciate the way that you said that, or the way that I was treated, or whatever. What they're doing is holding you accountable. You showed up this way, and I want to let you know that didn't work well for me. That's accountability. And so if Brene Brown feels shame in the aftermath of someone calling her out, that's not the same thing as someone shaming her. what it would sound like if she were being shamed by someone else, right, is you should be ashamed of yourself. How could you say something like that? You know, blah, 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 blah. That energy, that's being shamed, you know? And I keep like, I'm watching myself like put the finger up in my face. Like you did a thing and you should feel bad about it. And you're the problem. And you're the, like, that is what we're used to, right? You might have been parented that way. So as soon as you start parenting yourself, that's the only framework you have, is shaming yourself. But it is important that you understand that you owning and taking responsibility for the way that you're treating yourself is not the same thing as you shaming yourself. And that's foundation, because if you think that every time you pay attention to your own behaviors that hurt you or harm you, it becomes shaming, now you're stuck. Shame is a paralyzing force. Shame is a spiral. That's why they call it a shame spiral, because you just spiral. You can't get anywhere. But there needs to be, this is why we need to have the integration of the tender self-compassion, okay? Because you can say, I have this behavior that is causing me harm. It's causing me discomfort. I don't feel good about it. I don't like it, okay? So sit with that for a second. How does it feel emotionally? You can pull up the feelings wheel, feelingswheel.com. How does it feel emotionally to sit in that truth? You're not running away. How does it feel? I feel ashamed. I feel embarrassed. I feel disgusted. I feel hurt. I feel inadequate. I feel insecure. I feel sad. Okay? This, now you insert tender self-compassion. This is a moment of suffering. This hurts. This is hard, right? I caused my own suffering, and I'm willing to look at that and take responsibility for that. I am willing to tell the truth about it, and this is uncomfortable. This is emotionally uncomfortable, right? This is how it works. Now I'm mindful of that. Oh, I feel so embarrassed. I feel so disgusted with myself. I feel so ashamed of myself. Breathe, 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 breathe. These are emotions. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay that you feel what you feel. You don't have to feel any different. It's hard. I know it's hard. That's what the compassion is for. Give yourself compassion, not to get out of pain, but because you're in pain. And especially because you caused it yourself. This is hard. This is hard. Doing this work is hard. Being a human is hard. Healing your relationship with food is hard. It's hard. So take responsibility, own it, and tell the truth about it, and then sit with yourself in your own suffering and remind yourself, this is human. This is so human that sometimes you're out of control and you behave in a way you don't like. Okay? Can you just be with it? And then get off your own back. It's not your fault. And be kind to yourself. And when you can do that, then you can move through the waves of emotion. And it might take seconds. It might take weeks of practice. But that's when you then can say, okay, that was hard and that was uncomfortable and kind of painful. But also, now I can actually do something about it. Now I can take ownership. Now I can take action. This is why, and I'm going to say so much more about this too. This is the dance of the masculine and feminine. This is how it works. There's taking responsibility and ownership, very masculine, right? And then there's all the feelings that come up when you do it that need your tenderness, the feminine, the hard, the soft. But it's not being in one or the other. It's this dance. It's this balance of how they come together. And that's what she's saying. Kristen Neff is talking about with the tenderness and the fierceness, right? The masculine energy. It's all the same. So I'm going to say a couple more things about guilt and shame, just because I think this is really, we need to know the difference here, because again, I'm just going to say these things. Guilt is an emotion that tells you, I did something wrong, something I regret, like hurting someone else or yourself. It can be a healthy emotion that helps kids and adults. I find this so funny in all of this like content where it's like, this is how it works for kids, as though it's like not the exact same for adults. It can be a healthy emotion, right, that helps kids and adults reflect, apologize, and make amends. So what's coming up here is this idea, and I'm going to say more, guilt is adaptive. Guilt is brilliant, right? If you do something, if you show up in a way that is out of alignment, you treat someone in a way, again, including yourself, that you're not proud of, it's important that you feel guilty. It's important that you feel guilty. And again, very often when we feel guilty, we turn away because it's uncomfortable, because we make meaning of it and we turn it into shame. We turn it into I'm a bad person and all that stuff. But the truth is you want to sit in guilt. And I remember one time, oh God, I remember one time I did something I was so ashamed of. I really was. I was in shame spiral. And then I remember kind of almost shifting out of shame into guilt. So it became less about me and more about the thing I did. And I remember having this moment of awareness that was, I was in so much discomfort and pain, reflecting on the thing I did and the way that it hurt someone that I really loved. And I remember thinking, or really receiving this knowing, that it was very important for me to sit in that discomfort. It was important for me to actually embody the energy of guilt so that I had the motivation to never behave that way again. And that's important, because other people can tell you not to do stuff. Other people can shame you. But when you sit in your own guilt and it hurts and it's uncomfortable, you have reason to grow up and evolve and change the way you behave. So it's adaptive. It's important, right? Shame is different. Shame is when you feel you are wrong instead of just your actions. And so instead of I made a mistake, it is I am a mistake. Not helpful, not adaptive, paralyzing, like I said. So shame is a negative feeling about who you are. Guilt is a negative feeling about your behavior. Shame makes you feel like your actions mean you have bad values. Guilt makes you feel like your actions fall outside of your good values, right? That's what it means to be out of alignment, is like, this isn't who I am. I behaved in a way that is outside of my moral fiber. Shame, example, I am a bad person for not knowing how to control my drinking or eating. Guilt, I feel bad about how my drinking habits have hurt myself and others. Could say the same thing for eating habits. Shame can contribute to low self-esteem, keep us stuck in unhealthy cycles. Guilt can be helpful as long as it's translated into taking action, like changing habits or making amends. So, as I just said, Brene Brown quote directly here, guilt is adaptive and helpful. It's holding something we've done or failed to do against our values and feeling psychological discomfort. So again, if you're listening to this, you know at this point, not all discomfort is bad. Not all discomfort is to be avoided. But this, again, sometimes, like guilt, it's adaptive and helpful to feel psychological discomfort. You don't want to turn away from that. You don't want to numb that. If you're acting out of your own alignment, if you're acting out of your own values, if you're acting in a way that you're not proud of, in order for you to do something different and show up the way you want to, part of that is the process of feeling guilty for it. And so if you feel guilty, I'm laughing because, again, it's like everything's a rabbit hole. This is where I also shared this recently on Instagram, where you can feel guilty from the perspective of like diet culture conditioning, which I would say is just kind of like a mindless guilt. It's like, I ate this food. It's a bad food. That makes me a bad person. I feel guilty. I feel ashamed. All of that. That's not helpful. That's not getting you anywhere, because it's not coming from you. It's coming from diet culture. It's coming from the indoctrination that you have internalized. It's not your own, right? But it's different if you were to say, I feel guilty that I chose that food that is harmful to my body. I feel guilty for what I ate, not because it's a bad food or makes me a bad person, but because it's not doing me any favors, because it actually is causing harm. And so again, it's so nuanced and it's hard to sometimes identify. But if you feel guilty about eating, or you feel guilty after eating, don't run away from it. Don't run away from it. Because it's very possible that the reason you feel guilty after eating is because you just caused harm to yourself through food. Not because the food is bad or because you are bad, right? And so, again, guilt can be adaptive, but especially when it comes to food, we turn away from it, we shy away from it because we think we're shaming ourselves. And the truth is, sometimes you are. Sometimes you are. You have to pay attention to that. If the reason you feel bad is because diet culture told you that that's a bad food and you shouldn't eat it, we want to move away from that. That's the stuff we want to unlearn. But if you feel bad because you made a decision and that decision was a food choice that caused you harm or pain, right? That's adaptive guilt because you don't want to show up that way. You don't want to keep choosing foods that are going to hurt you. You want to choose foods that are going to help you. But if every time you feel guilty because you chose a food that hurts you, you interpret it as a shame spiral, and so you just dissociate, now you're not looking at it. You're not taking responsibility for it. You're not being held accountable. And so how do you expect change to happen? Okay, so that's that. So here's what we do to overcome shame and guilt, okay? This is the path if you're in it. You distinguish between the act and yourself. Okay, the way that you ate, the way that you drank, the way that you behaved, whatever you did, that's not who you are. And the good news is, here's the great news about guilt, by the way. The reason you feel bad about it is because it's not who you are. The reason that you feel guilty in the first place is because you have a moral compass within you, right? And so the psychological discomfort is the distinction between who you are and that thing you did. And so that matters. And again, is really good news because if you feel guilty, it means you care. You're not a sociopath. That's what's happening here with guilt. So you can reframe it that way. The other things to do is accept responsibility. I did do that, right? This is where say sorry. And even internally, just accept responsibility. Oh my God, the way I used to avoid this was just to like, even internally, it was kind of like, just an avoidance and a denial. That's not mine. But the truth is, it is. A lot of the time, it is. Accept responsibility. Make amends. So say you're sorry. Own it. Acknowledge it. I did this thing and I apologize, right? Problem solve. So think about how you got yourself into that situation to begin with, maybe. What kind of problem solving do you need to do? But this is what guilt can become, is the motivation to do things like make amends, accept responsibility, and solve your problems, make better choices in the future, and forgive yourself. Forgive yourself, right? It's okay. You're a human. You're doing your best. All of the above. That is what we do with shame and guilt. Okay, now, an hour and a half later, I'm going to walk you through the fierce self-compassion steps so you can start also practicing this. So very similar to the tender self-compassion, fierce self-compassion has 3 parts. And the first also is mindfulness. So the energy here is clarity. It's mindful clarity. And what that means is you're looking the situation in the face. You are not sweeping it under the rug. And again, I cannot say enough here about how powerful this step is. If what you have been doing so far is turning away from the truth, and like I had done for a very long time, just sweep it under the rug, ignore it, deny it, avoid it. Mindful clarity is to say, my eyes are open. I see what's going on here. I see the truth of what's happening. I'm not going to turn away, and I will not ignore this. And before I say anything else, there's a part of me that even wants to say, like, even more than I can't express how important this step is. If you're someone who hears this and is like, then what? Then what? Then what do I do? Like, I looked at it, okay, and I'll tell you the other steps, right? But notice what comes up at just this first step, because that can be really a lot. Or, you know, it has been for me anyway. But it's again, think about the inspiration of if someone were hurting or harming a child of yours, It's the, I'm not turning away from this anymore. I'm not ignoring this anymore. And that's powerful. The second step is still also, similarly, common humanity. So the energy here, things you can think of, by standing up for myself, I'm standing up for my rights as a human being. Everyone deserves to be treated fairly. I'm no exception. I'm not the only one that has been through this or has gone through this. I'm not alone. And remembering, again, this is human. I am part of a larger whole. And so I think the important thing there is, for me, especially when I am working through this in my own kind of internal system, what helps me is thinking about kind of, again, other people, like the same way that tender self-compassion is like, what would you say to a friend or, you know, someone that you love and respect and care about? That can give you the blueprint for how you want to speak to and treat yourself. And the same is true here, where it's like, I would never want this kind of treatment to happen to someone else. Why is it okay for me? And that comes up very often in relationships too, right? Where it's like, we don't feel safe setting our own boundaries. But if we saw someone we loved being walked all over and taken advantage of the same way that we allow ourselves to be, we'd be like, absolutely not, right? Like, you don't get to do that to my best friend. You don't get to. And so it can be very helpful to say, wait, this wouldn't be okay for anyone else. Why am I tolerating it with myself? Right? That's the common humanity here, the fierceness around it. And then kindness. Kindness is still the third step. We're still talking about compassion, but now it's in the form of courage. So similarly to, again, a best friend, if I had a friend or loved one in this situation, what would I say to them to help them be brave? What would I say to them to help them stand up for themselves, to encourage them, to empower them, right? Again, if I had a friend that was coming to me saying, I feel like I'm being taken advantage of by this person, or this person is hurting me or harming me, what would I say to them? It's not all about tenderness all the time, right? It's not about saying like, oh, your feelings are valid. Your feelings are valid, and that's important. And also, what are you going to do to advocate for yourself? What are you going to do to stand up for yourself? How can we support you in being brave and no longer putting up with this bullshit? That's compassion. That is fierce self-compassion. So this is where you can say, I'm going to use my voice. I'm going to call upon the inner strength in me. I am going to tap into my mama bear for myself. What does that look like? What does that sound like? What does that feel like? And sometimes this form of self-kindness can be simply, it's simple, it's not easy. All of this is simple, but none of it is easy. Is I can do this. I'm strong enough to do this. And this is why, you know, like Glennon Doyle has made this a very common, popular thing to say. We can do hard things. Okay? Like, fierce self-compassion is ultimately, I can do a hard thing. I believe in myself to do this. I have the strength to do this. I have the courage to do this. I can handle this. I can tackle this. And when you have that energy, you know, I mean, you could probably feel it. It's empowering. And that's where you take action from. Not because you're bad or wrong, not because you're ashamed, not because you're inadequate and insecure, but because you are whole and complete and human and lovable and worthy exactly as you are. And you want some things to be different in your life. And that's okay. That's also part of being human. That's where you take action from. That's fierce self-compassion. So again, if you want more of that, there's a fierce self-compassion workshop on my website. And the reason I'm plugging that again, and the tender self-compassion one too, is because on these podcast episodes, I'm not going to live provide the experience of moving through these things together with the body language of it and the physiology of it and kind of trying it on and moving through it and moving through the steps together. We're not doing that here. I'm teaching you this stuff. But if you want to have a 2-hour experience of learning this and moving through it and actually being guided by me through it, that is what is available in those workshops. All right. So that's what I have for you today. But I will tell you where this is going is next. I'm going to say, we're going to talk more about the integration for aligned action. Because like I said earlier, this is balancing masculine and feminine. This is balancing tender and fierce. This is kind of knowing how to do that dance and how they work together so that you can, actually have the balance of inner healing and outer change and the wholeness that comes with that. And so that's where we're going. And I'm super excited about it because I just think that this is like, the coolest shit in the world. And then it will have everything to do, again, with your relationship with food and eating. And so the last thing I'll say, as this is included in my slides for my coaching program that I just love, it's a yin yang symbol. What's it called? Yin yang? Is that? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And part of it says, do no harm, right? That's the tenderness. Do no harm. We're not judging. We're not shaming. We're not blaming. We're accepting ourselves. That's part of it. That's half of it. Mixed with the other side that says, take no shit. That's the fierceness. So when you're thinking about embodying both of these energies and having them both work for you and work together, that's what you want to think about. Do no harm and take no shit. You're not hurting other people and you're not hurting yourself. You're not being judgmental, right? You're not coming from a place of division and better than, worse than, shame, all of that. And at the same time, take no shit. Don't let people walk all over you. Don't let people take advantage of you. Don't let people hurt and harm and abuse you. And don't do that to yourself. So don't take shit from other people and don't take shit from yourself. But also do no harm to other people and do no harm to yourself. And you can have all of it together at once if you can come out of the black and white thinking paradigm, right? That it's like one or the other. So, okay. Oh my God, it's 11:11 again. Guys, you can't make this up. You really can't make it up. Okay, so that's my cue. Wow. God, this is so fun. Thank you for listening. I hope you love it. As always, my DMs and my email inbox are open to your questions and follow-ups and thoughts. Also, if you have not yet rated, reviewed, and subscribed to the pod, I would really appreciate that if you're willing. So that's it. That's it for today. I love you. I love that we get to do this together. This is a really great time. And I'll see you next time for the next chapter, let's say. Have the best day of your whole life. Mwah.